In this video, we explore the remarkable and legendary tale of the last Viking Berserker, a warrior whose defiant last stand has echoed through the centuries. His story unfolds during one of the most pivotal moments in English and Viking history, the Battle of Stamford Bridge in the year 1066, a time marking the final chapter of the Viking Age. The Viking Age, which had seen centuries of Norse raids, exploration, and settlement across Europe, was drawing to a close. The once feared warriors of the North were now facing decline, and their grip over foreign lands was loosening. But before the curtain fully closed on their era, one final, incredible act of resistance would etch itself into legend. The backdrop to this legendary moment begins with the death of King Edward the Confessor, the ruler of England who died without an heir. This triggered a fierce succession crisis, with multiple claimants vying for the English throne. One of the key figures was Harold Godwin's son, who was quickly chosen by the English council to become king. However, his rise to power angered others, most notably his estranged brother Tostig Godwin's son, and the powerful King Harald Hardrada of Norway. Together, Tostig and Hardrada launched a Viking invasion of England, sailing with a formidable fleet and army to take the crown by force. After defeating English forces at the Battle of Fulford, the Vikings seemed unstoppable. But what they didn't expect was King Harold Godwinson's lightning-fast march from the south of England to confront them. At Stamford Bridge, the Vikings were caught completely by surprise. As the Anglo-Saxon forces advanced, one lone Viking warrior, possibly a Berserker, stepped forward. Armed with a massive axe and fierce determination, he held the narrow bridge single-handedly, fending off wave after wave of English soldiers. This moment, legendary in its courage and ferocity, became a symbol of Viking valor and defiance. Though his name is lost to history, this warrior's stand at Stamford Bridge represents the final roar of the Viking spirit before it faded from the world stage. His actions would become myth, remembered not for victory, but for unshakable resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. Following the death of King Edward the Confessor in early 1066, England was thrown into a chaotic power struggle. Edward died without a direct heir, leaving the English thrown up for grabs. The Witnagemot, a council of nobles, quickly appointed Harold Godwin's son, one of the most powerful earls in the country, as the new king of England. While Harold had strong political backing, his claim was far from unchallenged. One of the most immediate threats came from within his own family. Harold's brother, Tostig Godwin's son, had once ruled as Earl of Northumbria, but had been ousted by a rebellion due to his harsh governance and lack of local support. When Harold sided with the rebels and allowed Tostig's exile to stand, it created a deep rift between the brothers. Tostig, humiliated and vengeful, began plotting his return to power. Seeking powerful allies, Tostig traveled abroad and found a willing partner in King Harald Hardrada of Norway. Hardrada was a battle-hardened Viking king, respected across Europe, and he too had ambitions for the English crown. He believed he had a valid claim through an old agreement between former kings of England and Norway. Tostig managed to convince Hardrada to take up the sword and invade England. In September 1066, the two leaders launched a massive invasion force, sailing from Norway with around 300 longships. Their armies landed in northern England, quickly defeating local forces at the Battle of Fulford, forcing the city of York to surrender. The invasion was swift and brutal, catching the English off guard. With two powerful enemies now united against him, one foreign, one family, King Harold Godwin's son faced an immense challenge. However, his response would be equally swift and legendary, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic and heroic confrontations of the Viking Age. In September 1066, King Harald Hardrada of Norway, alongside Tostig Godwin's son, launched a massive seaborne invasion of England. Their combined force arrived with an impressive fleet of approximately 300 longships, carrying thousands of seasoned Viking warriors. This marked one of the final great Viking invasions of the British Isles and would lead to a dramatic confrontation with the forces of the English crown. Sailing down the eastern coast of England, The invading army made its way up the River Ouse toward the key city of York, a vital political and military center in the north. The Norwegians landed near the Humber River and quickly moved inland. Their presence prompted an immediate response from the English, led by Earls Edwin and Morcar, who commanded the northern levies of King Harold Godwinson's army. The two sides clashed in what would become known as the Battle of Fulford, fought just outside the gates of York on September 20th, 1066. The English attempted a preemptive strike, hoping to push the Vikings back before they could fully deploy. Despite their courage, the English forces were heavily outnumbered and less experienced than Hardrada's battle-hardened troops. The Vikings, using their superior tactics and reinforcements arriving mid-battle, managed to outflank and overwhelm the Anglo-Saxon forces. The battle turned into a decisive Norwegian victory, with heavy losses inflicted on the English side. This crushing defeat forced the defenders to retreat in disarray. As a result, the city of York surrendered shortly afterward, recognizing that resistance was futile against the might of the invading Norse army. The victors paused at Stamford Bridge, just a few miles east of York, awaiting hostages and tribute. It seemed as though the Viking campaign was succeeding, until unexpected news of King Harold Godwinson's rapid approach would soon change everything. After the devastating Viking victory at the Battle of Fulford, it seemed that northern England was all but lost. York had surrendered, and the invading forces of King Harald Hardrada of Norway and Tostig Godwinson were preparing to consolidate their control. Confident in their position, they believed they had time to rest, reorganize, and receive hostages from the city. However, King Harold Godwinson was already on the move. Upon hearing of the Viking invasion, Harold acted with incredible urgency. Realizing the gravity of the threat, he gathered a force of elite warriors, nobles, and loyal earls, and undertook one of the most legendary forced marches in English history. From London to Yorkshire, a distance of nearly 200 miles, Harold and his men traveled day and night, covering the distance in just 4 days, an astonishing military feat. This breakneck pace allowed the English army to catch the Vikings completely by surprise. On the morning of September 25th, 1066, as the Norsemen rested at Stamford Bridge, only a few miles east of York, they were completely unaware that Harold's forces were so close. Many of the Viking warriors had even left their armor behind, assuming there would be no battle that day. Suddenly, from over the hills, the English army appeared, charging down upon the unsuspecting Norse troops. The element of surprise was total. The Vikings were forced to scramble into defensive positions with no time to properly organize. The Battle of Stamford Bridge began with the English army storming downhill, catching the Norse forces off guard. The Vikings were split, some trapped on the wrong side of the bridge, others unarmed and disorganized. King Harold's brilliant and swift maneuver turned the tide of the campaign, proving his leadership, stamina, and determination to defend his crown at all costs. This surprise attack would lead to one of the most memorable battles in English history, marking not only a turning point in the Viking invasion, but also the beginning of the end for the Viking Age. As the Battle of Stamford Bridge erupted into chaos, with Viking forces caught off guard by the sudden English attack, one moment stood out as both heroic and legendary. Amid the confusion and retreat, a lone Viking warrior stepped forward to make a final, desperate stand, holding the narrow bridge that separated the fleeing Norsemen from the advancing English army. According to legend, this fearless man was no ordinary soldier. Many believe he was a Berserker, a Viking warrior who had entered a trance-like rage, said to draw supernatural strength and endurance from the spirit of a wild animal, often a bear or wolf. Fueled by fury, devotion, or possibly both, he took his position on the bridge, wielding a massive two-handed axe, and stood against the full force of the English onslaught. Because the bridge was narrow, only a few men could engage him at a time. The Berserker used this to his advantage, expertly cutting down every soldier who dared to approach. It is said that he killed at least 40 English warriors, his axe rising and falling in a brutal, relentless rhythm. No man could pass. Bodies piled around him, and still he stood, unstoppable and unfazed. Despite repeated attacks, the Berserker showed no sign of tiring. Arrows and spears did little to slow him. It was clear that brute force alone could not bring him down. Finally, an English soldier devised a clever plan. Using a half-barrel as a makeshift raft, he floated down the river underneath the bridge. As he came directly beneath the warrior, he thrust a spear upward, striking the Viking in the groin, a devastating blow. The Berserker fell to his knees, mortally wounded. With his death, the English forces were finally able to cross the bridge and resume their attack. Though his name has been lost to history, the lone Viking stand became a symbol of ultimate bravery and resistance, remembered for centuries as one of the last great acts of Viking defiance. The lone Viking who defended the bridge at Stamford Bridge was not just a skilled warrior. Many believed he had entered the legendary and fearsome state of the Berserker. In Norse tradition, Berserkers were elite fighters who were said to possess supernatural strength, entering a frenzied, trance-like condition during battle. This state allowed them to fight with extraordinary power, seemingly unaffected by pain, fear, or exhaustion. It was believed that Berserkers would channel the spirit of wild animals, especially the bear, an animal revered for its unmatched strength and ferocity. By invoking this primal force, the warrior would cast aside his human limits, becoming a force of pure rage and instinct. He no longer fought as a man, but as something greater, something untamed and relentless. In this altered state of mind, a Berserker was said to feel no wounds, suffer no fatigue, and ignore all fear. According to eyewitness accounts and later sagas, the warrior at the bridge displayed all the traits of this mythical state. Struck by arrows, spears, and swords, he continued fighting as if untouched, cutting down wave after wave of English attackers. His body was covered in wounds, yet he never wavered. Some reports even suggested that no blade could pierce his skin, and that fire and iron had no effect on him while he remained in the Berserker trance. This incredible resistance to injury baffled onlookers. Theories emerged that the Berserker had trained his body and mind through intense rituals, possibly using herbs, chants, or isolation in the wilderness to forge a spiritual bond with the bear spirit. Whatever the truth, in that moment on the bridge, he appeared almost invincible. Only a clever tactic, not brute strength, was able to bring him down. The fact that he had to be attacked from below, stabbed through the groin by a soldier in a barrel, only added to the sense that he could not be defeated in direct combat. Though he fell in the end, the Berserker's near superhuman endurance and rage left a lasting impression, one that echoed through history as a symbol of Viking ferocity and mystical power in battle. The story of the lone Viking warrior who held the bridge at Stamford Bridge is not just a product of myth and legend. It is also recorded in one of England's most important historical texts, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. This source confirms the incredible stand made by the Berserker, who blocked the crossing and delayed the English advance, allowing his fellow Norsemen time to regroup on the far side of the river. According to the Chronicle, the Viking warrior stood firm against wave after wave of attackers. Armed with a mighty axe, he fought alone on the narrow bridge, cutting down any who dared to approach. The passage mentions that an Englishman threw a javelin at him, but it had no effect. An important detail that supports the idea that this man was in a berserker state, seemingly impervious to pain or injury. Despite numerous attempts to bring him down, none succeeded through direct combat. His incredible defense and resilience frustrated the English soldiers, who began to realize that brute strength alone would not overcome this fierce opponent. Ultimately, he was only defeated by a stealthy maneuver. An English soldier floated beneath the bridge using a half-barrel, unseen by the Berserker. From beneath, he delivered a fatal upward thrust with his spear, striking the Norseman in a vulnerable spot, most likely the groin or lower abdomen. Even in death, the Berserker's stand had a profound effect. It not only delayed the English forces, but also became a legendary moment in Viking lore, highlighting the terrifying power and bravery of those who entered battle in the Berserker trance. The Chronicle's account, though brief, gives historical weight to what otherwise might be dismissed as mere myth. It preserves the memory of one of the last great Viking warriors to fight on English soil, defiant to the very end. The Battle of Stamford Bridge reached its dramatic and bloody climax with the deaths of two central figures in the Viking invasion, King Harald Hardrada of Norway and Tostig Godwinson, the brother of King Harold of England. Their fall not only marked a decisive English victory, but also signaled the end of the Viking Age, a period that had shaped Europe for nearly 3 centuries. Harald Hardrada, known throughout the Norse world as a seasoned warrior and king, had spent most of his life on the battlefield. By the time of Stamford Bridge in 1066, he was over 50 years old, but still a formidable presence. Even when ambushed and outnumbered by the English army, Hardrada did not retreat. In a moment of courage and defiance, he charged into the fray without wearing armor, wielding his sword with both hands and fighting alongside his men in the thick of battle. However, even legends are mortal. Amidst the chaos, an English archer loosed an arrow that struck Hardrada in the throat, fatally wounding him. He collapsed on the battlefield, and with his death, the heart of the Viking army was broken. His fall was a symbolic blow, not just a military loss, but the end of an era of Viking expansion, raids, and conquests that had terrorized and shaped Europe since the late 8th century. Alongside Hardrada fell Tostig Godwinson, who had allied himself with the Norwegians in hopes of reclaiming power and vengeance against his brother Harold. His death further sealed the fate of the Norse forces, who now found themselves leaderless and demoralized. The Viking survivors fled or were cut down. Only a small number were allowed to return to Norway. Just 24 of the original 300 longships reportedly made the journey home. The death of Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, marked the final chapter of the Viking Age, closing a legendary era with one of history's most dramatic final stands. Though the name of the lone Viking Berserker who defended the bridge at Stamford Bridge has been lost to time, his heroic last stand remains one of the most enduring and powerful symbols of Viking courage and ferocity. He was just one man, yet he stood against an entire army, an act so bold, so fearsome, that it became legend. In a moment of desperation and loyalty, this unnamed warrior stepped onto the narrow bridge, knowing that death was inevitable. Armed with only a massive two-handed axe, he faced down wave after wave of advancing Anglo-Saxon soldiers. It is said that he killed 40 men before he was finally brought down, not by strength, but by strategy, when a soldier floated beneath the bridge and fatally stabbed him from below. What made his stand so unforgettable was not just the number of enemies he felled, but the unshakable spirit he displayed. Some accounts claim he was in a berserker state, a trance-like fury believed to be fueled by the spirit of a wild animal, most often a bear or wolf. In this state, he would have felt no pain, ignored all fear, and fought with a supernatural energy that made him seem invincible. His story became part of Viking legend, not only for his actions, but for what he represented. He stood as the embodiment of the Viking warrior ethos, unyielding, fearless, and relentless. Even in the face of certain death, he did not run or surrender. His sacrifice gave his fellow Norsemen precious time to regroup and form a stronger defense. But more than that, it gave future generations a glimpse into the heart of the Viking spirit. Though history did not record his name, his memory lived on, in sagas, in chronicles, and in the imagination of those who heard the tale. He became more than a man. He became a mythical symbol of Viking might, a final echo of a fading age. His stand at Stamford Bridge was not just a military action, it was a defiant roar of the Viking Age, heard one last time before the world changed forever.